We are on to chapter 7, Miniature. Psychologists, and more especially philosophers, pay little attention to the play of miniature frequently introduced into fairy tales. In the eyes of the psychologist, the writer is merely amusing himself when he creates houses that can be set on a pea. But this is a basic absurdity that places the tale on a level with the merest fantasy, and fantasy precludes the writer from entering, really, into the domain of the fantastic. Indeed, he himself, when he develops his facile inventions, often quite ponderously, would appear not to believe in a psychological reality that corresponds to these miniature features. He lacks that little particle of dream which could be handed on from writer to reader. To make others believe, we must believe ourselves. Is it worth while, then, for a philosopher to raise a phenomenological problem with regard to these literary miniatures, these objects that are so easily made smaller through literary means? Is it possible for the conscience of both writer and reader to play a sincere role in the very origin of images of this kind? Yet we are obliged to grant these images a certain objectivity, from the mere fact that they both attract and interest many dreamers. One might say that these houses in miniature are false objects that possess a true psychological objectivity. Here the process of imagination is typical, and it poses a problem that must be distinguished from the general problem of geometrical similarities. A geometrician sees exactly the same thing in two similar figures drawn to different scales. The plan of a house drawn on reduced scale implies none of the problems that are inherent to a philosophy of the imagination. There is even no need to consider it from the general standpoint of representation, although it would be important from this standpoint to study the phenomenology of similarity. Our study should be specified as belonging definitely under the imagination. Everything will be clear, for instance, if, in order to enter into the domain where we imagine, we are forced to cross the threshold of absurdity, as in the case of Trésor des Veuves, Bean Treasure, Charles Nodier's hero, who gets into a fairy's coach the size of a bean. In fact, he gets into it with 6 litrons of beans on his shoulder. There is thus a contradiction in numbers as well as in the size of the space involved. 6,000 beans fit into one. And the same thing is true when Michael, who is oversized, finds himself, to his great surprise, in the house of the Fille-aux-Miettes, beggar fairy, which is hidden under a tuft of grass. But he feels at home there and settles down. Happy at being in a small space, he realizes an experience of topophilia. That is, once inside the miniature house, he sees its vast number of rooms. From the interior, he discovers interior beauty. Here we have an inversion of perspective, which is either fleeting or captivating, according to the talent of the narrator or the reader's capacity for dream. Nodier, who was often too eager to be agreeable, and too much amused to give full rein to his imagination, allows certain badly camouflaged rationalizations to subsist. In order to explain psychologically this entry into the tiny house, he recalls the little cardboard houses that children play with. In other words, the tiny things we imagine simply take us back to childhood, to familiarity with toys and the reality of toys. But the imagination deserves better than that. In point of fact, imagination in miniature is natural imagination, which appears at all ages in the daydreams of born dreamers. Indeed, the element of amusement must be removed if we are to find its true psychological roots. For instance, one might devote a serious reading to this fragment by Hermann Hesse, which appeared in Fontaine, number 57, page 725. A prisoner paints a landscape on the wall of his cell, showing a miniature train entering a tunnel. When his jailers come to get him, he asks them, quote, politely to wait a moment to allow me to verify something in the little train in my picture. As usual, they started to laugh because they considered me to be weak-minded. I made myself very tiny, entered into my picture, and climbed into the little train, which started moving, then disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. For a few seconds longer, a bit of flaky smoke could be seen coming out of the round hole. Then this smoke blew away, and with it the picture, and with the picture, my person. How many times poet-painters in their prisons have broken through walls by way of a tunnel? How many times, as they painted their dreams, they have escaped through a crack in the wall? And to get out of prison, all means are good ones. If need be, mere absurdity can be a source of freedom. And so, if we follow the poets of miniature sympathetically, if we take the imprisoned painter's little train, geometrical contradiction is redeemed, and representation, capital R, is dominated by imagination, capital I. Representation becomes nothing but a body of expressions with which to communicate our own images to others. In line with a philosophy that accepts the imagination as a basic faculty, one could say, in the manner of Schopenhauer, the world is my imagination. The cleverer I am at miniaturizing the world, the better I possess it. In doing this, it must be understood that values become condensed and enriched in miniature. Platonic dialects of large and small do not suffice for us to become cognizant of the dynamic virtues of miniature thinking. One must go beyond logic in order to experience what is large in what is small. By analyzing several examples, I shall show that miniature literature, that is to say, the aggregate of literary images that are commentaries on inversions in the perspective of size, stimulates profound values. I shall first take a fragment from Cyrano de Bergerac, which is quoted in a very fine article by Pierre-Maxime Scholl, entitled Le Thème de Gulliver et le Postulat de Laplace. Here the author is led to accentuate the intellectualist nature of Cyrano de Bergerac's amused images in order to compare them with this astronomer-mathematician's ideas. The Cyrano text is the following. This apple is a little universe in itself, the seed of which, being hotter than the other parts, gives out the conserving heat of its globe, and this germ, in my opinion, is the little sun of this little world that warms and feeds the vegetative salt of this little mass. In this text, nothing stands out, but everything is imagined, and the imaginary miniatures propose to enclose an imaginary value. At the center is the seed, which is hotter than the entire apple. This condensed heat, this warm well-being that men love, takes the image out of the class of images one can see into that of images that are lived. The imagination feels cheered by this germ, which is fed by a vegetable salt. There's a footnote here. How many of us, once we have eaten an apple, attack the seed? In company, we restrain our innocent mania for decorticating the seeds in order to chew them. And what thoughts we have, what daydreams when we eat the germs of plants. Oh. Back to the text. The apple itself, the fruit, is no longer the principal thing, but the seed which becomes the real dynamic value. Paradoxically, it is the seed that creates the apple, to which it transmits its aromatic saps and conserving strength. The seed is not only born in a tender cradle, protected by the fruit's mass, it is the generator of vital heat. In such imagination as this, there exists total inversion as regards the spirit of observation. Here, the mind that imagines follows the opposite path of the mind that observes. The imagination does not want to end in a diagram that summarizes acquired learning. It seeks a pretext to multiply images, and as soon as the imagination is interested by an image, this increases its value. From the moment when Cyrano imagined the seed sun, he had the conviction that the seed was a source of life and heat, in short, that it was of value. Naturally, this is an exaggerated image. The jesting element in Cyrano, as in many writers, as for instance Nodier, whom we mentioned a few pages back, is prejudicial to imaginary meditation. The images go too fast and too far. But a psychologist who reads slowly and examines images in slow motion, lingering as long as is needed over each image, will experience a sort of coalescence of unlimited values. Values become engulfed in miniature, and miniature causes men to dream. Pierre Maxime Schul concludes his analysis by underlining in the case of this particularly felicitous example the dangers of the imagination, which is master of error and falsehood. I think as he does, but I dream differently, or to be more exact, I am willing to react to my reading the way a dreamer does. Here we have the entire problem of the oneric attitude towards oneric values. Already, when we describe a daydream objectively, this diminishes and interrupts it. How many dreams told objectively have become nothing but onerism reduced to dust? In the presence of an image that dreams, it must be taken as an invitation to continue the daydream that created it. The psychologist of the imagination, who defines the positivity of the image by the dynamism of daydream, must justify the invention of the image. In the present example, the problem posed, is the seed of an apple its sun, is an absurd one. If we dream enough, and undoubtedly a lot is needed, we end by giving this question oneric value. Cyrano de Bergerac did not wait for surrealism to delight in tackling absurd questions. From the standpoint of the imagination, he was not wrong. The imagination is never wrong, since it does not have to confront an image with an objective reality. But we must go further. Cyrano did not mean to deceive his readers. He knew quite well that readers would not mistake it. He had always hoped to find readers worthy of his imagination. Indeed, there is a sort of innate optimism in all works of the imagination. Gerard de Nerval wrote in Aurelia, page 41, I believe that the human imagination never invented anything that was not true in this world or any other. That reminds me of something else. This is me talking. A Chinese, what is it? Everything imagined will become real. Similar feeling. Anyway, when we have experienced an image like the planetary image of Cyrano's apple, we understand that it was not prepared by thought. It has nothing in common with images that illustrate or sustain scientific ideas. On the other hand, the planetary image of Bohr's atom, in scientific thinking, if not in a few indigent, harmful evaluations of popular philosophy, is a pure synthetic construct of mathematical thought. In Bohr's planetary atom, the little central sun is not hot. This brief remark is to underline the essential difference between an absolute image that is self-accomplishing and a post-ideated image that is content to summarize existing thoughts. Okay, we shall continue soon.